3:42 a.m., local time. The Persian Gulf looked inert. Black water stretched flat beneath a moonless sky, oil tankers drifting along established lanes, as if nothing in the region had changed in decades. On civilian tracking feeds, traffic moved normally. Coastal lights along southern Iran flickered with the same rhythm they had the night before. Then the radar picture began to thin. Not collapse, not fail, thin. Along Iran's southern air defense perimeter, operators inside hardened command rooms noticed minor anomalies across secondary feeds. Commercial transponder returns flickered. A civilian cargo flight briefly vanished from a coastal sweep before reappearing 3 seconds later. Maritime identification data lagged half a refresh cycle behind schedule. Nothing dramatic, nothing actionable, but it was synchronized. At 2:58, 180 nautical miles offshore, 2 U.S. guided missile destroyers operating in international waters received coded authorization through encrypted satellite burst transmission. No public statement, no escalation notice, no movement information. At 3:01, their vertical launch systems opened. The first wave of BGM-109. Tomahawk cruise missiles cleared the cells in disciplined succession. Ignition flashes briefly illuminating the decks before the missiles banked low and descended towards sea-skimming altitude. They did not head directly for the primary target. They flew toward radar. 6 coastal surveillance nodes positioned along Iran's southern defensive arc were struck within a 4-minute window. Explosions tore through antenna arrays and control buildings. Power feeds severed. Data uplinks severed. But the reaction inside Iran's integrated air defense network was not panic. It was procedure. Backup radar systems activated almost immediately. Hardened mobile arrays rolled into operational posture. Fiber-linked command circuits shifted load to secondary hubs positioned inland. Iranian doctrine, refined through decades of anticipating American preemption strikes, assumed the first wave would target outer sensors. The installations destroyed were expendable. By 3:08, Iranian command authorities had reconstituted a functional air picture. The primary network remained intact. That was the expectation. At 3:10, 4 F-35 Sea Lightning II fighters launched from a carrier, positioned well beyond the immediate engagement envelope. Their climb was visible, their radar cross-section deliberately unmasked by external ordnance. They were meant to be seen. Inside Iran's $2.9 billion Covert mountain facility, officially classified as a research and industrial complex, but in reality a hardened command and control node for advanced missile integration and unmanned strike coordination. Operators watched the tracks converge. The facility had been carved into a granite massif in the Zagros range. Reinforced blast doors weighing thousands of pounds, independent turbine generators, fiber optic data lines buried 10 meters underground, multi-layered air defense rings including S-300P Mu-2 systems, Bavar 373 batteries, and mobile short-range interceptors positioned in concealed valleys. It was designed to survive kinetic assault. At 3:14, passive infrared detection arrays across several mountain peaks began tracking the inbound F-35s without emitting radar energy. Iranian air defense commanders maintained electromagnetic silence, waiting for optimal engagement range. The Americans had struck the outer layer. They had not yet touched the fortress. At 3:16, the first Iranian engagement radars activated. Multiple fire control arrays came alive simultaneously, sweeping the night sky with precision emissions. Missile launch cells opened across 2 concealed valleys. 6 long-range interceptors ignited and climbed at supersonic velocity toward the approaching American fighters. Inside the U.S. airborne command architecture, the response was immediate. An E-3 AWACS orbiting at 32,000 feet detected the radar bloom within milliseconds. Data cascaded across secure networks linking fighters, destroyers, and electronic warfare platforms already holding at the edge of the battle space. Because the F-35s were not the strike, they were the trigger. At 3:18, as Iranian operators focused on the inbound stealth fighters, a separate aircraft orbiting far to the south altered course. To conventional radar, it appeared as a civilian pattern business jet, maintaining lawful altitude and speed. Its call sign did not match any airline. It was an EA-37B Compass call. While missiles climbed toward the F-35s and defensive systems illuminated the sky, the true attack vector began its run. The target was not the mountain. It was the network inside it. 0319 local time. The Iranian missiles closed rapidly on the 4 F-35s, their onboard guidance systems updating through active radar beams that now saturated the upper atmosphere. Inside the cockpits, warning tones cut through controlled breathing. Symbols flashed red. The pilots did not break formation immediately. They waited for the exact cue embedded in the mission timeline. At 3:19:22, all 4 aircraft executed simultaneous high-G defensive splits, releasing countermeasures and diving toward pre-calculated escape corridors. The maneuver forced the Iranian interceptors to commit to updated trajectories. That was the moment the electronic spectrum fractured. The EA-37B Compass call sign, Phantom Echo, initiated maximum output transmission through its AESA-based jamming architecture. But this was not brute force noise. It was structured interference, frequency matched, phase aligned, and precisely timed to overlap with Iranian mid-course guidance data bursts. The first 2 incoming missiles lost clean track. Their telemetry began reporting conflicting positional solutions. Inside Iranian control rooms, operators observed nothing overtly catastrophic. Radar returns still appeared. Target icons still moved, but subtle inconsistencies crept into the system. A 200-meter drift in predicted intercept, a 0.7-second timing offset between radar and optical confirmation. Data that was technically valid, but no longer coherent. At 3:20, 2 of the 6 interceptors self-destructed after onboard safeties detected guidance conflict. The remaining 4 continued ballistic tracking, but their probability of kill dropped sharply as the F-35s accelerated away from engagement geometry. Iranian commanders recognized the jamming. They pivoted. Rather than chase the fighters, they redirected attention toward the electronic origin point. Passive sensors triangulated the unusual emission signature emanating from the south. The civilian-looking jet. At 3:21, a reserve S-300 battery activated for the first time that night. Its engagement radar cut through the darkness, locking onto Phantom Echo. 4 48N6E3 missiles launched in rapid succession. Unlike the F-35s, the EA-37B was not built for violent evasion. It lacked afterburners, lacked the thrust to outrun Mach 6 interceptors. Instead, it relied on proximity and precision. Inside the aircraft's electronic warfare compartment, 7 specialists monitored live signal feedback from the Iranian network. The facility in the mountains, designated by U.S. intelligence as Site Meridian, had now activated internal coordination protocols. That was the objective. The facility's hardened network operated through buried fiber links, isolated from internet access and resistant to remote cyber intrusion. But isolation from digital networks did not equal isolation from physics. Every high-speed processor, every encrypted router, every hardened interface emitted microscopic electromagnetic leakage. Side-channel signatures invisible to ordinary receivers, but detectable by specialized reconnaissance platforms. Hours earlier, an RC-135 rivet joint had mapped those emissions from standoff distance, building a fingerprint model of the facility's internal clock synchronization, pulses, and data routing intervals. At 3:22, Phantom Echo executed the mission's core maneuver. It descended to 36,000 feet and shifted from broad-spectrum jamming to injection mode. Through modulated directional bursts, it began transmitting tailored signal fragments designed to mimic legitimate internal commands. Not random corruption, not brute sabotage, authenticated mimicry. Within Site Meridian's underground command node, the network accepted the packets as legitimate internal latency corrections. Timing skew increased by microseconds. Checksum validations passed because the corruption existed at the clock layer. Missile battery coordination began drifting out of phase. Above ground, the 4 S-300 missiles targeting the EA-37B approached terminal phase. Inside Phantom Echo, the final defensive protocol activated. Rather than attempt to blind the missiles outright, operators injected false mid-course updates into the data link frequency between ground radar and interceptors. The attack created a logic paradox inside the missile guidance software. The missiles received two simultaneous positional truths. At 4.2 nautical miles from impact, internal safeguards interpreted the conflict as corruption. All four detonated mid-air, 4 brief flares in the night sky. But the greater damage was unfolding underground. At 3:24, hydraulic control systems governing Site Meridian's blast doors received overlapping operational states, secure and unseal commands executing simultaneously. The doors froze, partially engaged. Ventilation shafts tied to pressure regulation began reporting inconsistent airflow data. Backup generators switched load unnecessarily, introducing transient voltage fluctuations across interior control arrays. Operators inside the mountain believed they were responding to minor synchronization faults. They did not realize their system clock had been poisoned. At 3:25, US E-3 controllers transmitted final targeting coordinates to a strike package inbound from the southwest. 4 F-15EX Eagle IIs approached at high altitude, each loaded with GBU-72 advanced 5,000-pound penetrator munitions. They were not targeting the Granite Mountain. They were targeting the compromised seams, the doors that no longer fully closed, the ventilation shafts whose pressure controls were out of sync, the access tunnels whose blast geometry relied on precise seal timing. At 3:27, the F-15EXS released. 8 bunker buster munitions descended under GPS guidance accurate to within 3 meters. They impacted not with theatrical devastation, but with calculated placement. Shockwaves traveled through partially sealed corridors. Ventilation systems collapsed under redirected blast pressure. Collapsed tunnel segments blocked internal movement routes. The underground fortress remained standing, but its arteries were severed. At 3:29, internal command circuits at Site Meridian went dark sector by sector. Aircraft launch elevators jammed mid-cycle. Drone deployment shafts were obstructed by debris. Primary data relays shut down as generators tripped protective failsafes. The facility had not been destroyed, it had been disabled. And at 3:31, the American strike package began its coordinated withdrawal, every aircraft accounted for. Behind them, Iran's $2.9 billion Covert installation remained structurally intact inside the mountain. But it could not fight. The strike had not erased it from the map. It had removed its ability to function. 3:33 local time. Silence did not return immediately. Inside Site Meridian, alarms continued flashing across redundant control panels. Hydraulic pressure irregularities, environmental containment faults, communications latency errors. None of it looked catastrophic. Individually, each warning suggested recoverable malfunction. Together, they signaled systemic paralysis. The underground complex had been engineered to survive bunker buster impact. Reinforced concrete, granite overburden, compartmentalized blast corridors, triple redundant power. It had not been engineered to survive corrupted synchronization. At 3:34, technicians inside the primary command vault attempted to reset the core coordination server cluster. They initiated manual override on the internal network clock. The reset command propagated. It arrived in segments, milliseconds out of alignment. Door actuators cycled without full pressure equalization. Ventilation dampers responded half open. Backup generators interpreted load transitions as fault spikes and isolated themselves from the grid. The architecture was hardened against destruction. It was vulnerable to confusion. Above ground, Iranian air defense units remained active. S-300 and Bavar 373 batteries continued scanning for renewed American penetration. Missile reload crews worked under floodlights. But something had shifted. Targeting coherence was no longer stable. Fire control solutions updated in inconsistent intervals. Engagement radars briefly lost synchronization with command uplinks before reacquiring. Iranian commanders did not yet know why. They suspected electronic interference. They did not suspect internal timing, drift-seeded minutes earlier. At 3:36, US E-3 controllers maintained long-range surveillance orbit outside Iranian missile envelopes. The strike package had exited primary engagement zones, but the mission remained active. Because destruction was never the sole objective, confirmation was. Signals intelligence platforms began passive listening across the spectrum. Iranian emergency frequencies spiked, secure lines between regional commands activated. Short-burst encrypted transmissions multiplied. The pattern was consistent with crisis mitigation, not counterattack. At 3:38 inside Site Meridian, the first full cascade failure occurred. An attempt to restart an internal drone launch elevator triggered a pressure imbalance within its vertical shaft. The system interpreted a false seal confirmation and began lift sequence. The platform jammed halfway, triggering mechanical overload. Hydraulic systems locked. Engineers initiated emergency stop. The elevator froze permanently. In a facility designed to project unmanned aerial systems across regional corridors, the launch shaft had become unusable. Elsewhere in the complex, internal blast doors remained partially engaged. Maintenance crews attempted manual override through mechanical crank systems. The doors did not respond. Control software displayed green status indicators. Reality did not match the display. At 3:41, Iranian cyber units attempted remote diagnostic interrogation of the facility's internal architecture. They found nothing externally compromised. No malware signature. No network intrusion trace. No unauthorized access logs. The facility appeared secure. It simply did not function. Above the Gulf, Phantom Echo maintained distance while gradually reducing transmission output. Its mission window was closing. The signal injections had achieved desired timing, skew. Continued proximity would only increase risk. Inside the aircraft, electronic warfare officers monitored confirmation metrics. Missile coordination intervals inside Iranian batteries were still fluctuating. Command routing tables showed inconsistent timestamp patterns. Internal network pulse signatures deviated from baseline models. The corruption remained active. At 3:44, the final U.S. aircraft crossed back beyond engagement arcs. No American aircraft had been lost. No pilot had been forced to eject. No direct air-to-air combat had occurred. And yet, the target, the $2.9 billion underground installation carved beneath mountain granite, had ceased to operate as designed. At 3:47, Iranian air defense commanders ordered temporary power-down cycles on multiple systems to restore synchronization integrity. That decision confirmed the strategic outcome. Power down meant blindness, even partial, even temporary. For the first time since the operation began, Site Meridian was offline, not destroyed, offline. At 3:52, seismic sensors inside the mountain detected minor rock shifts along damaged ventilation corridors. Structural engineers assessed containment viability. They determined the core vault remained stable, but airflow capacity was reduced by 40%. Temperature inside sealed chambers began rising incrementally. Backup cooling systems initiated load compensation, straining generators already misaligned by corrupted timing loops. The base could not project force. It could barely sustain itself. At 3:55, regional command elements in Tehran received consolidated reports. Radar decoys destroyed, primary defensive systems engaged, multiple missiles expended, facility structural integrity intact, operational capability compromised. The assessment language was cautious, but the reality was stark. The strike had not flattened the mountain. It had severed the nervous system. At 4:01, U.S. assets cleared the theater entirely. Surveillance remained at standoff range. Iranian commanders faced a decision tree that grew narrower with each passing minute. Restart fully and risk further timing corruption. Remain powered down and concede temporary paralysis. Neither option restored immediate combat capability. The unexpected strike had not sought spectacle. It had sought leverage. And by the fourth hour of darkness, leverage belonged to the side that had turned physics into a weapon. 4:07 local time. The mountain was intact. That was the first line in the internal Iranian situation report. Granite overburden stable. Primary structural vault uncompromised. No penetration of the main command chamber. But structure was not the metric that mattered. Function was. At 4:09, engineering teams inside Site Meridian initiated full diagnostic reboot of the internal command lattice. Power cycled across 3 isolated server stacks. Backup generators synchronized manually rather than through automated timing. For 12 seconds, system integrity appeared restored, green across the board. Then targeting subsystems began reporting inconsistent coordinate deltas, offsets of 200 to 340 meters. Not random, not catastrophic, subtle enough to miss. Engineers attempted firmware validation. Checksums matched baseline. No foreign code detected. The corruption was not invasive, it was temporal. Milliseconds inserted into synchronization pulses. Data packets arriving fractionally out of phase. Guidance solutions calculated against slightly distorted reference time. Weapons systems did not fail visibly, they miscalculated invisibly. At 4:12, Iranian Regional Command ordered suspension of all outbound drone operations from the facility. Launch shafts remained inoperable. Ventilation channels partially obstructed. Environmental control irregularities persisted in 2 lower decks. The facility was now a bunker, not a launch hub. Above the Gulf, U.S. assets had withdrawn beyond immediate threat range, but ISR platforms remained engaged at altitude. RC-135. Rivet joint continued wideband collection. Satellite passes adjusted orbit focus toward the Zagros corridor. Confirmation did not require visual collapse. It required behavioral change. At 4:18, Iranian S-300 batteries executed a full recalibration cycle. Operators manually realigned radar clocks using hardened reference beacons. That action temporarily reduced coverage envelope by nearly 20%. The defensive web thinned. No second American strike followed. That absence was deliberate, because the objective had already been achieved. At 4:23, thermal signatures within site meridian indicated rising ambient temperatures in sealed drone storage compartments. Reduced airflow had forced cooling systems into overload cycles. Engineers began venting select sectors to prevent equipment degradation. Ventilation shafts damaged by precision penetrators were not collapsed entirely. They were obstructed just enough to disrupt pressure equilibrium. The mountains still stood. The airflow did not. At 4:29, Tehran's National Command Authority received consolidated intelligence from the site. The underground complex, valued at $2.9 billion in excavation, hardening, and integrated defense, remained physically survivable. Operational projection capability, suspended. Air defense coherence, degraded. Command network synchronization, unstable. Estimated restoration window, uncertain. No external intrusion traceable. No cyber breach logged. No confirmed physical penetration into the primary vault. The attack had left no obvious fingerprint, only consequence. At 4:34, analysts inside U.S. Indo-Pacific and Central Command fusion cells updated mission status. Strike package recovered. 0 aircraft losses. Target operational disruption confirmed. The language in the classified summary was restrained. Facility functionally disabled. No structural destruction required. That line would travel further than any explosion, because it redefined deterrence. At 4:41, Iranian cyber defense units initiated forensic reconstruction of electromagnetic anomalies recorded during the engagement window. They isolated unusual emission spikes consistent with high-powered directional electronic attack. But by then, the platform responsible, Phantom Echo, was hundreds of miles distant, descending toward a secure recovery field. Its crew debriefed in silence. No dramatic exchange, no visible damage, no dogfight victory. They had altered a battlefield without firing a missile. At 4:52, Site Meridian attempted a controlled restart of limited drone launch capability. Elevator systems failed to recalibrate. Hydraulic pressure sensors reported nominal levels, but mechanical tolerances remained misaligned. The shaft stayed frozen. At 5:03, regional Iranian commanders transitioned posture from active defense to containment and recovery. Air defense batteries reduced emission tempo. Mobile units repositioned defensively. The strike window had closed, but its echo remained. By 5:17, dawn approached the Zagros ridgeline. Light crept across reinforced blast doors that were neither fully open nor fully sealed. Inside the underground corridors, technicians continued manual recalibration efforts under rising heat and unstable network timing. The facility could be repaired, eventually. But the message embedded in the event was irreversible. Hardened concrete can be bypassed. Air-gapped fiber can be influenced. Physical isolation does not equal immunity. At 5:32, U.S. leadership received the final confirmation packet. Satellite imaging showed no catastrophic collapse, only subtle surface disturbance around access points. Signals intercepts indicated sustained internal troubleshooting. The objective had never been spectacle, it had been demonstration. American power projection had shifted from explosive dominance to informational penetration. The unexpected strike had not leveled a mountain. It had leveled confidence. By sunrise, the Persian Gulf appeared unchanged. Tankers moved through established lanes. Patrol aircraft maintained altitude. Civilian radar feeds showed nothing unusual. But inside military planning rooms across the region, a new variable had entered the equation. Underground no longer meant unreachable. Air-gapped no longer meant untouchable. Defense without synchronization meant vulnerability. The final operational log entry read, "Target disabled, no further action required." No celebration followed, only recalculation.